I watched a movie this week called Hoaxed. The movie is about our news, our media, and particularly about fake news, about how news and media stations, they're portraying a message, they're portraying news that isn't actually true. They're just trying to portray a message that sells them things, that gets them money, or sells a certain message that isn't necessarily true, but they're doing it anyway. And this movie was so interesting. It was particularly about the US media, but there was also a story in there about Australian media and how it is saying a certain message, a certain news article, just to get their point across, not actually to tell the truth. It's pretty easy to see that, particularly at times, that this happens. Even earlier, when everyone went crazy over toilet paper and grabbing supplies, there was a certain message that got told in media and within social media, within individuals, and that was get as much as you can right now because we're going into isolation. You need to get toilet paper, you need to get all these supplies, you need to do what you can, push people out of the way because what you need to do is get it. Otherwise, you're going to miss out. And so that message was told, and it went crazy in our culture and crazy in the shopping centres. And it was a message that was fake news, that wasn't real. It was just based out of fear and anxiety. It was selling stories. It was selling this message. And so people ran with it. Media outlets ran with this message. And what I found really interesting about this movie is towards the end of the movie, they had a series of journalists and a psychologist and a bunch of people who thought of themselves as presenting the true news. They were saying, how do we actually know what is true anymore? And they were talking about and expounding upon this thought of how do we actually know now that the news articles and everything, how do we know actually what is true anymore? And as they were talking about this, they had a painting in the background of Adam and Eve, a painting about this amazing image of Adam and Eve, and particularly they were zooming in and highlighting the fruit in that scene, highlighting the fruit in Adam and Eve, as if to say, almost to say that this problem has been a part of humanity from the beginning of time, as if to say that this is not just an issue for right now, but this is something that we've had to deal with. This, how do we know what is true? And it's almost like them saying that the new lie, the new snake out of the Garden of Eden is actually the media stations these days. That's the true lie that is being told. And we have to try and figure out and discern what is really true despite the lies that are being told. We have to know what is true, this fruit, that is the truth. Well, how do we know what is true? And I thought it did a great job of portraying this, but it misses so much of a particular aspect that is important to us as Christians, and that is the individualistic part of it in the story. What's our individual part in the story of Adam and Eve? Yes, there are going to be stories that are told. Yes, there are lies that the snake or the media is being told at us, and we have to discern and figure it out. But Adam and Eve still chose to take of the fruit. They still chose to pick that fruit, even though despite they knew what God had said, despite knowing that they shouldn't have picked that fruit, they chose to listen to the lies of the snake and to pick that fruit. They chose to choose control and truth in their own terms. So that is what is going on so much in our culture today. Truth is not an absolute thing that God is in control of anymore. Truth is relative. It can be whatever you want it to be. Truth is what you think it is, and that's all that is important. True, you have to figure that out for yourself, and that is what is true. That is the lie that the enemy wants to take and tell us today, that you can choose what is truth and what is not. The story of Adam and Eve is that we chose to choose truth in our own terms, chose to choose control in our own terms. And we need to continue to submit that back to God, continue to lay that before our amazing God. And we had heard a great message from our lead pastor, Pastor Jace, this morning in Church Live, a sound of praise. That he had this image of two people, person A, who was hunched over and who submitted himself to the voices of this culture, the voices dictating how he should be and how he should behave. But then he saw person B standing and rising, not being dictated by these times, but choosing to stand on the word of God, choosing to stand as God has called him to be. That we would need to be choose to be person B time and time again. Choose to stand on who God has called us to be. Stand with a sound of praise coming from our lives. And I love that this week there's going to be that sound that comes forth, that this heart from Pastor Jace is so what we're believing for us as North Perth, that we're believing for a sound of praise to rise within us, a sound of praise to come into our homes, into our families, our work, our lives, our individual lives, a sound of praise. And this is so important when we think about this whole aspect of truth and control. Because as we choose to actually have a sound of praise, we are declaring, no, God, you are in control. We put our trust, and our truth is dictated by who you are, not what we think, not what the media is saying, but who you are, oh God. That this sound of praise changes our attitude, changes our lives. And that this is what we're believing for us. That this sound of praise that will rise this week changes our attitudes and our thoughts. It changes who we are. A great writer, Dallas Willard, in his book, Renovation of the Heart, he says it like this. He says, "The revolution of Jesus is first and always a revolution of the human heart. His revolution does not proceed through the means of social institutions and laws, the outer forms of our existence, intending that these would then impose a good order of life upon people who come under their power." That is so much what the media is trying to do. Rather, his is a revolution of character, which proceeds by changing people from the inside through ongoing personal relationship with God and one another. It is a revolution that changes people's ideas, beliefs, feelings, and habits of choice, as well as their bodily tendencies and social relations. It penetrates to the deepest layers of their soul. External social arrangements may be useful to this end, but they are not the end, nor are they a fundamental part of the means. That the revolution of Jesus is him changing our inside, changing the very character of the individual. That's what Jesus wants to do in our lives. And as we continue to think about this sound of praise in our week, continue to actually go to praise rather than to worrying and fear and thinking about what's the media trying to present to me, what is really true, all this scattering, we actually determine I'm going to have a sound of praise this week. I'm going to determine that I'm going to have a voice that actually speaks praise and declares that God is in control, that he has the victory, that as we continue to have this, Jesus is going to change us. He's going to transform. He's going to do a work in our character, in our beliefs, in who we are as we submit to God and let this change us. He's going to do a work in our lives. And so this is just a start. I mean, that revolution of the heart, that's a big thing, but I feel like that starting place is a sound of praise. That starting place is us actually changing the attitude of what we say and what we speak, and actually have a sound of praise, of adoration to our God. And so can I encourage us this week to think about what we can do to have this in our lives? And even as we think about this thought of disengage to engage, the thought that we've been thinking about over the last couple of weeks, let us think about in this praise aspect how we can both engage in praise with others. And there are going to be opportunities on the Hepburn Heights Instagram. There's going to be Instagram lives every night at 8 p.m. There's going to be moments of worship and prayer and praise. So make sure you get onto the Hepburn Heights Instagram. I'm going to be part of that and doing some praise and worship on Instagram Live on the Friday night. And so log in and just engage with others in praise and engage with others as we sing and worship God together. But then we also need to have moments where we disengage, where we actually need to turn off social media, where we need to get away from Instagram and Facebook and actually maybe even turn off your phone and just engage in God's presence in your own space. Have worship and praise in a moment where you're not thinking about everything else, but you've actually disengaged from those things and of just praising and worshiping God in your house or on a walk or having a moment. And so can I encourage you, maybe think about that right now. What are 2 times this week, 2 times that you can have a disengaged praise? 2 days where it could be a 30-minute block where you disengage from the things of the world and you just engage with who God is. But then also maybe think about 2 times that you can log in and praise and worship with others. And maybe you have a Zoom chat or you have a moment where you can praise with other people. It's so important that we have both of these elements a part of our lives and are forming us to be the very people God wants us to be as we continue to have this sound of praise in our lives, where we get aside from what the media or what culture is telling us how to live, potentially in a fake way, and we actually allow God to help us, guide us by His Spirit, be the very truth that He wants us to be. And so let's do that this week. I'm also going to be putting out a podcast. I've been doing that the last couple of weeks. If you haven't seen our podcast, make sure you jump on. But really want to keep digging into what this looks like for us as we figure out this sound of praise for our lives. So let's do that. Let's be that for our families, for ourselves. Let's let God transform us and renovate our hearts. Thanks, guys. Love you.